Uh, hello, hello. It's hot, so I'm gonna take this coat off and put on a shirt. But when I do, I'll pause it so you don't even know. In my previous video, I read H.G. Wells' The Red Room, and I was watching something I forgot already. But because The Red Room turned the Jack Nicholson's movie on some channel. I think it's HBO. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is, but it's Five Easy Pieces. Five Easy Pieces. And I was reminded of the Jack Nicholson movie when he was escaping from the cuckoo nest, and it was the Indian that did it. So I escaped from the Red Room, and now I'm reading another legend by Washington Irving, because Washington Irving apparently was a big time pimp back in the day. And that is the legend of Sleepy Hollow, found among the papers of the late Dietrich Knickerbocker. Now, the Knickerbocker Hotel is in New York City. Shouts out to the Knickerbocker Hotel. Never been there, but I've seen it. Found among the papers. Okay, read that. A pleasing land of drowsy head it was, of dreams that wave before the half-shut eye, and of the gay castles in the clouds that pass, forever flushing round the summer sky. Castle of indolence. Now, some of you, some of us, some of they, some of them might be confused by the word gay. Apparently, it meant happy since the beginning of time or close to it. I don't know, but I got my froze lip, I call it, going on right now. It's like it's it's the Three Stooges lip, I call it. Anyway, in the bosom of one of those spacious coves, which indent the eastern shore of the Hudson, at that broad expansion of the river, denominated by the ancient Dutch navigators the Tappan Zee, and where they always prudently shortened sail and implored the protection of St. Nicholas when they crossed their lives, a small market town or rural port, which by some is called Greensboro, but which is more generally and properly known by the name of Tarrytown, as you be tearing away the river front, not the Mexican. Don't mind me, sometimes I get carried away in a Terry, not the way. This time, this name was given it, we are told, in former days by the good housewives of the adjacent country, from the inveterate propensity of their husbands to linger about the village tavern on market days. Now, pause. If you get stumbled on a word I say, just rewind it back a couple times so you can get a dictionary or an encyclopedia or a thesaurus and look it up. Find the synonyms and the antonyms, and you'll be on your way. Be that as it may, I do not vouch. I'll even spell it for you. Though. I mean, if I get slighted, I'll even spell it out. So if I go back, I can understand what I'm even saying. I'll be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm saying. That's what the book was saying. That's what the writer, director, and the producer was saying. Washington Irving reminds me of Washington Apples or Granny Smith apples. You know what I mean? just good to crunch on. But sometimes it might turn into caramel corn. Be that it may, I do not vouch for the fact, but merely advert to it, for the sake of being precise and authentic. Not far from this village, perhaps about 3 miles, not Pittsburgh, there is a little valley, or rather lap of land among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook, not Danielle, glides through it with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker, bring, bring, is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform tranquility. Not Miss Kaya, Bob Marley. I recollect that when a stripling, my first exploit in the squirrel shooting, not the black squirrels of Bowling Green, was in a grove of tall walnut trees that shades one side of the valley I had wandered into at noontime, when all nature is peculiarly quiet. Now when I walked to the door, the lady was like, "You don't know." I was like, "Motherfucker, fuck you." Said my dick. And was startled by the roar of my own gun as it broke the Sabbath stillness around and was prolonged and reverberated by the angry echoes. If ever I should wish for a retreat whither I might steal from the world and its distractions and dream quietly away the remnant of a troubled life, I wish I know of none more promising than this little valley from Shaker Square, from the listless responsibility of the place and the Peking duck, the peculiar character of its inhabitants, who are also descendants from the original Dutch settlers in Pennsylvania. This sequestered glen has long been the name of Sleepy Hollow, and its rustic lads are also called the Sleepy Hollow Boys. Throughout all the neighboring country, a drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere, not the atmospheric pressure. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor. Now in my head I heard, here we go again. Certain it is the place still continues under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk into continued reverie, not the reverie we hear at 5 in the morning. Whatever it is, I forgot it. What is it? How does it go? How does reverie go? Yeah, whatever it goes, I forgot. The constant dreams and the drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of a settlement. Others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrick Hudson, not Kendrick Lamar. Certain it is, the place still continues under the sway of some wishing power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, my people, causing them to walk in a continual reverie. It's maybe they're walking from circle to circle looking like, yeah, this is the only way I can get paid though, dog. Why you hating? Why you so blind? Why you so sublime? You don't even know your own mind, bro. Oh, that's what it said. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs, are subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. So that's been going on for a long time. The whole neighborhood abound with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare, oftener across the valley than in any other part of the country. And the nightmare, with her whole ninefold, seems to make it the favorite scene of her gambols. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be the commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air, the apparition of a figure on horseback without the head. Is that the headless horseman? It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of night as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley but extend at times to the adjacent roads and especially to the vicinity of a church that is at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of those parts who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning the specter allege that the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to the scene of the battle. Cannonball run in mighty quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow like a midnight blast is owing to being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of his legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows. And that the specter is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. It's dark and cold, and this horse goes up and down the drawbridge, freaking everybody out that comes across or near it. It is remarkable that the visionary propensity I have mentioned is not confined to the native inhabitants of the valley, but is unconsciously embedded by everyone who resides there for a time, however wide awake. Wide awake? They may have been before they entered that sleepy region. They are sure in a little time to inhale the witching influence of the air, by and begin to grow imaginative, to dream dreams and see apparitions. I mention this peaceful spot with all possible loud, for it is in such little retired Dutch valleys found here, and they embosomed in the great state of New York. The population, manners, and customs remain fixed, while the great torrent of migration and improvement, which is making such insistent changes in other parts of the restless country, sweeps by them unobserved. They are like those little nooks of still water which border a rapid stream, where we may see the straw and bubble riding quietly at the anchor, or slowly revolving in their mimic harbor undisturbed by the rush of the passing current. Though many years have elapsed since I trod the drowsy shades of Sleepy Hollow, yet I question whether I should still not find the same trees and the same families vegetating in the sheltered bosom in this by place of nature, their abode in a remote period of American history, that is to say, some 30 years since, a worthy weight of the name Icabad Crane, who sojourned, or, as he expressed it, tarried in Sleepy Hollow, for the purposes of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplies the Union with pioneers for the mine as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legion of frontier woodmen and the country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall but exceedingly lanky, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snake nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. His schoolhouse was It was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed of logs, the window partly glazed and partly patched with leaves of copybooks. It was most ingeniously secured at vacant hours by a withe twisted in the hand of a door, and stakes set against the window shutters, so that though a thief might get in with perfect ease, he would find some embarrassment in getting out, an idea most probably borrowed by the architect Jos van Houten from the mystery of an eupholet. The schoolhouse stood in a rather lonely but pleasant situation, just at the foot of a woody hill, with the brook running close by. You can hear that water running with the surprise. With the birds chirping like the wind blowing constantly, shaking the window, with the brook running close by, and a formidable birch tree growing at the end of it. From hence the low murmur of his pupils' voices, conning over their lessons, might be heard of a drowsy summer's day, like the hum of a beehive, interpreted now and then by the authoritative voice of the master in the tone of a menace or command, or pre-adventure, the peradventure, by the appalling sound of the birch, as he urged some tardy loiterer along the flowery patch of knowledge. Truth to say, he was a conscientious man that ever bore in mind the golden maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child. Icabad Crane scholars certainly were not spoiled. I would not have imagined it, but, however, that he was one of those cruel potentats of the school who joy in the smart of their subjects. On the contrary, he administered justice without discrimination, or rather than severity, taking the burden off the backs of the weak and laying it in those of the strong, you mere puny stripling that winced at the least flourish of the rod was passed by with indulgence. But the claims of justice were satisfied by inflicting a double portion on some little tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin who sulked and swelled and grew dogged and sullen beneath the birch. All this he called doing his duty by their parents, and he never inflicted a chastisement without following it by the assurance so consolatory to the smarting urchin that he would remember it and thank him for the longest day he had to live. When school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of the larger boys, and on a holiday afternoon would convoy some of the smaller ones home, who happened to have pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, noted for the comforts of the cupboards. Indeed, it behooved him to keep on good terms with his pupils. The revenue arising from the school was small, and he would have been scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. But to help out his maintenance, he was, according to his country custom, in those parts boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers whose children he instructed. With those he lived successively a week at a time, thus going the rounds of the neighborhood with all his worldly effects tied up in a cotton handkerchief, that all this might not be too onerous on the purses of his rustic patrons, who are apt to consider the cost of schooling a grievous burden, and schoolmasters as mere drones. He had various ways of rendering himself both useful and agreeable. He assisted the farmers occasionally in the lighter labors of their farms, helped to make hay, mended the fences, took the horses to water, drove the cows from pasture, and cut wood for the winter fire. He laid aside, too, all the dominant dignity and absolute sway with which he lowered it in his little empire, the school, and became wonderfully gentle and ingratiating. He found favor in the eyes of the mothers by petting the children, particularly the youngest, and like the lion bold, which Willem so magnanimously the lamb did hold, he was sit with the child on a knee, one knee, and rock a cradle with his foot for the whole hour together. For whole hours together, he would rock a cradle with his foot. In addition, those other vocations, he was the single master of the neighborhood, and picked up many bright shillings by instructing the young folks in somnolently. Sounds like a made-up word. If you want to spell it out loud, it's Psalmody. Psalmody. So maybe it's church. What the fuck is a psalmody? You know what I'm saying? What the fuck is that? What the hell is this fucking psalmody? Sounds like some Psalm Sunday shit. Well, it was on Sunday, so maybe it was a church. And it was church. It was a matter of no little vanity to him on Sundays to take his station in front of the church gallery with a band of chosen singers. Where sounds like I read this shit before, but I didn't read it, but feels like a deja vu. Maybe it's Icabad Crane vu, you know what I'm saying? Maybe that's where it came from. Yeah, I read this shit in like 7 days old and shit. Maybe I read this shit when I was 7 days old. You know what I'm saying? That's what I feel like. I was 7 days old when I read this shit. Or I heard it when I was 7 days old. Or I was still my baby's mama. My mama's babies in the womb of my mom, you know what I'm saying? Maybe I was 7 days old, they just got done fucking and 7 days later, it was a week later. And I heard the shit. Yeah, that's what it was. To take his station. This is a station. Is this a station? Is this a station? Is this a station in front of the church gallery with a band of chosen singers, where in his own mind he completely carried away the poem from the person. Certain it is, his voice resounded far above all the rest of the congregation, and there are peculiar quavers still to be heard in that church, and which may even be heard half a mile off, quite to the opposite side of a mill pond on a still Sunday morning, which are said to be legitimately descended from the nose of the Icabad Crane. Thus, divers little makeshifts in that ingenious way that's commonly denominated by hook and crook, the worthy pedagogue got under tolerable enough, and was thought who understood nothing of the labor of the head work to have a wonderfully easy life of it. So we have, let's see, I don't want to keep reading or no? It's a long chapter, it's a long book. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow goes all the way up to, I don't want to read all that far. Oh, yeah. All the way up to page 61, and I'm on page 28. So I'm going to read page 29, and that's it. That's a long while. That's 30 books. That's 30 more chapters, you know what I mean? Or that's 30 more pages. So I'll read the next page, next 2 pages, I'll be finished with this one, and then, so I'm already on 28 minutes. That's crazy, I can't read fast at all, dog, you feel me? I'll be stopping, like, yo, adding my own little mix, you know what I mean? So that's kind of weird. But I guess that's what I do. I have to break out. I have to break out, I can't keep reading redundant shit I already read, so I'm doing it for y'all. The schoolmaster is generally a man of some importance in the female circle of a rural neighborhood, being considered a kind of idle gentleman, like personage of vastly superior taste and accomplishments to the rough country swains, and indeed inferior in learning only to the person. His appearance, therefore, is apt to occasion some little stir at the tea table, not the end of the tea table, but the tea table of a farmhouse, in addition of a supernumerary dish of cakes or sweetmeats, or peradventure, the parade of a slippery teapot, the silver teapot. Our man of letters, therefore, was peculiarly happy in the smiles of all the country damsels, a bunch of sexy women in dresses. How he would figure among them damsels in distresses, in the churchyard, between services on Sundays, gathering grapes for them from the wild vines that overrun the surrounding trees, reciting for their amusement the epitaphs of the tombstones, or sauntering with a wild bevy of them along the banks with the jasmine mill pond, while the well-bashful country bumpkins hung sleepishly back, envying his superior elegance and address. From his half the internet, the internet life. Also, he was a kind of traveling gazette, carrying the whole budget of a local gossip from the house to house, so that his appearance was also greeted with satisfaction. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition. From the he had read several books quite thorough, and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England's Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potentially believed he was in fact an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple crudelity. In his appetite for the marvelous and his power of this digestion were equally extraordinary, and both have been increased by his residence in this spellbound region. No tale was too gross or monstrous for his captious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on the rich bed of the clover bordering the Lola brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over the old Mather's direful taste until the gathering dusk of evening made the printed page a mere mist before his eyes. Then as he wended his way by the swamp and the stream and off of woodland to the farmhouse where he happened to be quartered, every sound of nature at the witching hour fluttered his excited imagination. The moan of the whip-poor-will from the hillside, that booting cry of the tree-load, that harboring of a storm, that dreary hooting of the screeching owl, or the sudden rustling in the thicket of the birds frightened from the roosts. The fireflies, too, which sparkled most vividly in the darkest places now, and that startled him as one of the uncommon brightness would stream across the path, and if by chance a huge blockhead of a beautiful beetle came winging his blundering fight against him, the poor varlet the varlet was ready to give up the ghost, and with that idea that he was struck with, which is token he only resorts on such occasions, either to drown thought or to drive away the evil spirits, was to sing palm tunes and pick up the Bible and read the psalm tunes, and give people the sleeper hollow as they sat by the doors of the evening, were often followed and filled with the awe of hearing his nasal melody and linked sweetness, long drawn out, floating from the distant hill or along the dusky road. Another of his resources of fearful pleasure was to pass long winter evenings with the old Dutch wives as they sat spinning by the fire with a roll of apples roasting and sputtering along the hearth, and listening to their marvelous tales of ghosts and goblins and haunted houses, haunted fields, and haunted brooks, haunted bridges, and haunted houses, and particularly the headless horseman, or the gaping Hessian of the hollow, as they sometimes called him. He would delight them equally by anecdotes of witchcraft and of the direful omens and pretentiousness of the sights and sounds in the air which prevailed in the early times of Connecticut, which and would frighten them woefully, and with speculations upon the comets and shooting stars, and with a alarming fact that the world did not absolutely turn around for him, and they were half the time topsy-turvy way where the curves, but if they were a pleasure in all this while snugly cuddling in the chimney corner of the chamber that was all of a ruddy glow from the crackling wood fire, and where, of course, no spectre dared to show his face, and it was dearly purchased by the terrors of his subsequent walk home, with fearful shapes and shadows beset his path amid the dim and ghastly glare of a snowy night. With what wistful look did he eye every trembling ray of light and sound streaming across the waste fields from the distant window? How often was his appetite appalled by some shrub covering snow, with which, like a sheeted spectre, beset his very path. How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, beneath his fleece, beneath his feet. He probably stank because he was cold and he was trying to get home, and dread to look over his shoulder, lest he should behold some uncouth being tramping across him. And how often he was thrown into complete dismay, not the dismays, not the bulls, not the braves, dismay by rushing blast howling among the trees, and the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his mighty scurryings. All these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness, and though he had seen many spectres in his time, and had been more than once banished by Satan in divers shapes in his lonely preambulations, yet daylight put an end to all these evils, and he would have passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all his works, if his path had not been crossed by being that causes more perplexity to mortal men than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was a woman. Alright, so I'm gonna pause right there and read it later. I got tired.